This is your inherited right. And every one of your leaders have this information. How many people know that the rest of the civilized world with the Special Committee of 24 for Decolonization has charged all the churches and civics groups to dispense this information that I'm talking to you right now? How many of you are aware of that? It's called the rights of indigenous people. That's world governments have come together for you all to declare your nationality. And yet it is not being distributed in your neighborhood. But yeah, everybody's coming here talking black stuff. That keeps you in the dead state of the economic suppression and the poisonous foods and everything else that they're dealing on you from the Spanish Inquisition. Because the people are not aware of what's really going on. Ignorance is dangerous. And so your language reflects to the world where you are. You understand? Give me an example. When Malik made the Hajj, he went over there, that black and white stuff. It was a French Muslim that schooled him. So because you made the Hajj, you ain't visiting home, you left home. But don't come here with that black and white stuff. That's that slave language in America. That doesn't go in the civilized world. That's the Maghrib. Maghrib, Morocco, the most extreme west, the great Masonic secret. So logically, when Malcolm came back, he already knew the enemy was on both sides. Because everybody knew it but him. And they had him out there having his neck out talking black, not knowing that he was denying his own right. And it took a French Muslim to school him. Then he came back here, and what? His own brothers with Europeans assassinated him. Because they knew he was going to tell them. Take out civil note. No, 56. That's when they released that side. They're supposed to release this side. Share with each other a note, because I'm going to show you how things are in your face. You know how they say the best way to hide things from people?
That's why they chopped off the note.
Now, I want you to look at it. I'll give you a chance for that. Now look on the back. Look on the back of the seal. Right? And you have two seals, don't you? Yeah. Right? Yeah. Look on the back. Now, someone read under the first seal. What does it say at the very bottom underneath the seal? Under the first seal. Say it out loud. The Great Seal. Now, again, we're thinking third grade grammatication, right? Read what's under the second seal. So, for a third grader, what part of speech is the word of? Preposition. A preposition is what? A substantive connector, which means those two seals are one. And as a matter of fact, they write it on there, O-N-E, right in your face. So how many of you know that the United States has a dual seal, but yet you handle this every day? Now, if you'll notice, under the flying bird, right, you'll see the President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Treasury, all the politicians speak under the flying bird. How come none of them speak under the Great Seal, which is apparently clearly there? That's the Great Seal. How come nobody speaks under it? Because the heirs are to be kept asleep. Now, if you'll notice over the bird's head, you'll see Hex Alpha with 13 stars. Hex Alpha is the insignia of the ancient Canaanite Moabite nation. They sometimes call us Yahudi because we crossed the river. It's not a religion. It's what we did. Before the great earthquake, when you saw that demonstration of the Mapamundi, when you saw all the land together, when we crossed the river under the great super devere of the ancient world, on this side, we were called Yahudi. Those who we're called Jews. Or Hebrew, those who cross the river. It's not a religion. Do you understand? It's the dividing of the land between Ham and Cush. Do you understand? And so, like I'm Anayamuya, what you call Cherokee. And many of you, some of you may be from Cherokees. They were tribal areas in the South. And some of you may be Navajo. That's more like the Delaware, Lower Jersey area. All right, and then my grandmom then was Blackfoot. Right? But those are names made up by Europeans. Do you understand? We're Moors. I'm Anya. People of the land. And we're not Indians either. And this is not India. Remember, how did we become called Indians? When the Romans tried to take over the trade routes of the Moors, on Calpe, Tariq had an army. And we had a fort there for close to 1,000 years. That's called Gibra al-Tariq, the mountain of Tariq. Some people say the rock of Gibraltar. And so they wanted to go around the Cape. Now, Pedro the Moor, do some research in your European schools because you ain't going to get it here. You got to deal with people outside of these shores.
What's the spelling of the last name?
Pedro the Moor navigated the Nino for Colombo, Cristoforo Colombo, who was working under the Inquisition for Ferdinand and Isabella. And understand at that time, Cuba was called Isabella. So they attacked us from the south. So you understand. There's a lot more history, that we could go into about Isabella too, but just giving you some keys. Now, Isabella and Ferdinand merged their kingdoms, and for Christendom defeated us. Do you understand? That has much to do with the Portuguese, etc., dealing with taking brothers and sisters from the islands actually to England, not actually reverse. They got people thinking they went to Africa on that side and brought people over here. No, they were taking them from here over there. And they pretty much wiped out Borican, you refer to as Puerto Rico. And so they had to take the families from surrounding islands to repopulate. And so when you see some of your other brothers and sisters of different complexions, don't get it twisted. They're Moors. That's your family. Do you understand? Same thing with the Philippines. They're Moros. You got to understand the operations of European colonial operations on the planet is the defeat of the Moors, which is you. That's what your mistreatment is all about. You've got to know the real history so that you can have a mental concept on how to overcome this for the coming generations. You cannot overcome this with false information. Do you understand? Your false information gives them what is called mandate. As long as you don't deal with the truth, it gives them mandate. Are we clear? All right. So, understanding that every person in position of authority and power is given degrees of this knowledge in masonry, like you'll see in, say, maybe the last 50 years or so, in some of the orders, they started the story about Hiram Abiff, the great architect. And you're buried in the dark north. And then they'll have that mosque in Philadelphia, which is City Hall. If you look at its design, it's like a mosque. 4 gates, parapet on the north, and they got Willie Penn standing 23.5 degrees facing east by northeast to the Masonic Lodge, 1 North Broad Street, and that's where they stopped the Masonic parade. And the cornerstone is not outside, it's in a grave pit, right inside the dark north. And then you have these Asiatics holding up the pillars of Atlas, Morocco. You got to get understanding, you see. So you must know the distinction between kingdoms, just like some people don't know the difference between cities and states. Kingdom is not the empire. The empire is what Georgie was talking about. That's where you're standing. That's why he had to take his oath, do some research on Day Street in New York, D-E-Y. And then he had to come to Philadelphia and take his oath again. And Philadelphus was the Capitolium. Then under Pike, they moved it to Washington to the Seven Hills. Are we clear? And so and that's why the Daughters of American Revolution, of which Hillary is one, DAR, that's the manual that is designed for citizenship and is used as a pattern around the world. And of course, you have to have a knowledge of the real culture to pass that test. And that's where they do naturalization. People have green cards.
Yeah.
Why? You don't have a green card. You, me, we.
So, okay, as you saw, that Taj Tariq Bey, who considered himself as a Moor, his claim is that the North Gate, which is North America, was really a part of the Empire of Morocco. And I came across something, and I know the city of Morocco is here in America. And that I also know that Morocco, the Empire of Morocco, had acknowledged the United States. And the Empire of Morocco had also gave permission for the United States, the European sons, to set up shop on the American shores, which we call today North America. And here's a letter. And remember, Taj Tariq Bey had mentioned something about Georgie, which is George Washington, the President of the United States. Okay. We talked about him because he came after the Articles of the Confederacy, okay, which was prior to. So here it is. This is George Washington, and he's writing the emperor or the sultan of the Empire of Morocco, who was living in New York City at the time. Notice how they said he was living in New York City. He wasn't living in the northwest coast of Africa, which represents the Kingdom of Morocco. No, they were referring to him as being in New York City, and maybe that's the reason why they call New York Empire State. It's quite interesting. And also take note that it was also mentioned that Philadelphia, also known as Philadelphia, is the original capital of the United States, which is true. And also what was mentioned was George Washington had took an oath in New York City on Day Street. Now, the Days, that is a tribe of the Moors. Just like El and Bey are also tribes of the Moors. Now, that is very interesting considering the fact that the George Washington, I think it's Masonic Museum, exists in Alexandria, Virginia. And Alexandria is also another Egyptian name, just like Philadelphia is. But let me get into this. It says New York, June 8th, 1789. Sir, although in the present unsettled state of the executive departments under the government of the Union, I do not conceive it expedite to call upon you for information officially, yet I have supposed that some informal communications from the Office of Foreign Affairs might neither be improper or unprofitable, for finding myself at this moment less occupied with the duties of my office than I shall probably be at almost any time hereafter, I am desirous of employing myself in obtaining an acquaintance with the real situation of the several great departments at the period, and of ascending to the administration of the general government. For this purpose, I wish to receive in writing such a clear account of the department, at the head of which you have been for some years past, as may be sufficient without overburdening or confusing the mind, which has very many objects to claim its attention at the same instant, to impress me with the full, precise, and distinct general idea of the affairs of the United States so far as they are comprehended in and connected with the department. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. That's one letter that George Washington, that he wrote to the Emperor of Morocco. Now, as you had just saw, Taj Tariq Bey said that Indians were not called Indians, but they were called Moors, and I guess reclassified as Indians, according to him. And that he claimed that the North Gate, which is North America, was actually a part of the Empire of Morocco. So, okay, so it says on the 20th of December, Morocco and the United States celebrate their friendship that is rooted in history. Today we recall Sultan Muhammad III's endeavors to seek diplomatic relations with the Americans. In 1777, the kingdom was the first nation to recognize publicly the independence of the American Republic. Now, at this time, the kingdom of Morocco in North Africa didn't exist. So, where would it have been? Because we know that the Sultan, or the Emperor of Morocco, he was in New York City, which they also call the Empire of New York. And then as you see here at the bottom, it says George Washington inaugurated in two cities. His first inauguration took place in New York City on April 30th, 1789, and his second in Philadelphia on March 4th, 1793, just like Taj Tariq Bey had mentioned. Now, as you had heard also, Taj Tariq Bey was saying that the Moors had control over the ports. The Empire of Morocco had control over that. And the Europeans were trying to take over those trade routes. And then the stronghold of the Empire of Morocco was from the Gibraltar of Morocco. So let's put this all together. Now, this is a letter, okay, from the former mayor of Chicago. And as you know, that Noble Drew Ali, the prophet Noble Drew Ali, was supposed to have been of Cherokee Indian descent and Moorish descent. Now let's look at this letter and see what it says. It says, Rahm Emanuel. It says, whereas the Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites, Hamathites, and Canaanites, who were permitted by the old Pharaohs of Kemet to transverse from East Africa and later form themselves kingdoms extending from northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa to the Atlantic Islands onto the present-day continental Americas. Now let's pause. We know because of UB News that he said that America is Egypt, okay, which is Tamare, and that from the word Tamare you get America, okay? We know this now, thanks to the extensive research that he did, talking about that and discussing that, okay? And we also know that the Pharaoh Ramses is known as the father of America. Okay, we know that, and we also know that the shrine of Nefertiti was found in the Grand Canyon, and that many mummies of many pharaohs was destroyed in the 1920s and even before that. And they found them right here in America, just like they found the body of King Tut, they say, I believe, in the state of Kentucky. So we have all this evidence that points to Egypt really being in North America, okay, and perhaps extending downward into South America. So I find that to be very interesting that he said the old pharaohs of Kemet. Now, Kemet is a word that means black land, And it's not because they're talking about the complexion of the people, it's because they're talking about the earth being rich, being fertile. Okay? So it says, to traverse from East Africa and later form themselves into kingdoms extending from the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa to the Atlantic Islands on the present day of the continental United States, the continental Americas. Whereas the indigenous Moorish peoples of the Americas are now united in order to again link themselves with the family of nations, whereas the Moorish Americans, being aboriginal to the territories of North, Central, and South America, have formed a sovereign theocratic government, which they talk about the Moor Science Temple that Noble Ali had set up in Chicago, and guided by the command principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, through the virtue of the universal right of self-determination, as well as the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples guaranteed in the Charter. And whereas on January 8th, 1886, Noble Ali was born in the state of North Carolina, destined to become the first patriot of his mentally enslaved Moorish American people. In 1912, he was later anointed as El Hajj Sharif Abdul Ali by the heads of Egypt, which is interesting, the heads of Egypt in the holy city of Mecca. And I know a lot of Moors say that Chicago was supposed to be in the city of Mecca. It says, to return to the United States as the last prophet and founding father of the newly risen nation of Moorish Americans as a result of the 13th Amendment, Moorish people were emancipated from slavery in 1865. Now therefore, I, Ram Emanuel, mayor of the city of Chicago, do hereby proclaim January 8th through the 15th, 2012 to be Moorish American Week in Chicago, and urge all residents to recognize the events planned for this time. Dated the 22nd day of December, 2011. Okay, so I find that to be very interesting, that as you see that Egypt was mentioned twice, that it said about the old pharaohs of Kemet, and we know Kemet is another word for Egypt, and we know that America is Egypt, that Egypt was definitely in America, or as it was also known as Atlantis. In the ancient days, America was known as Atlantis, and that the Egyptians had told the Greeks that their ancestors were the oldest people in the world, and that they came from Atlantis. And we know Atlantis and America is the same place. And that was mentioned in the book Queen Mu and the Sphinx. Okay? So I find that to be very interesting, and that Noble Ali basically took an oath underneath the Egyptian order, which is very interesting too. So we have to pay attention to that as well. Okay? Because all of that ties in, I believe, to what Taj Tariq Bey was saying. Okay? It all ties in. And remember, I told you that the Moors, they were mentioned as being pirates on the coast of America, and that American Indian women of certain tribes like the Delaware, Lenapes, were also called the Delaware Moors because of the intermixture between the Moors and the American Indian women. Just like you also had some Saponi Indian women that also had married Moors as well. And that was mentioned when they talked about the mound building Saponi Indians that also had some Portuguese or French or Moorish or Jewish ancestry because of the intermixture. When I talked about the Melungeons, that they were believed to have been a mixture of Saponi or Jewish or Moorish or Portuguese inhabitants. And I made mention of how the Moors had mixed in with other Indian tribes. Okay, so to me, a lot of this stuff, it's very interesting that Taj Tariq Bey would have broken it down and said that the empire of Morocco and the kingdom of Morocco is not the same. As we know, the kingdom of Morocco is underneath the empire of Morocco. And there is a city in America called Morocco, which is very interesting too as well. So it kind of just makes you think, was Morocco, did it exist in America? And if so, was the empire of America, the empire of Morocco, was it in the Americas originally? I just want your thoughts on that. So if you like this episode, give me a like. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. As well as hit the notification bell. Okay? It's greatly appreciated.